Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending this virtual presentation in extended format that I am showing in the General Assembly of the European Geophysical Union this year. This research is titled Multiscale Impacts of Antuco Basaltic Stratovolcano, Southern Andes of Chile. 6.2 thousand years ago sector collapse, and the work is related to the avalanche deposition, the eruptive behavior transformation, and the hydrologic reconfiguration of this area. So I will give a brief introduction in what the sector collapse means for the landscape configuration. Then I will talk about a little bit about Southern Andes volcanism and central Chile landscape. And then I will talk about Antuco volcano, its mid-Holocene sector collapse, and the post-collapse stratigraphy with some insights about the future research. So in terms of sector collapses, they can produce a big change in the landscape configuration, hydrologic configuration, and they generally fill the basins and valleys around volcano with huge amounts of debris material, and these deposits can reach hundreds of meters in depth. So there is a 1,000-year scale change in the landscape around the volcano. Additionally, they produce or they change the patterns of drainages, so they can block the drainages of rivers, producing river dam and then some temporary or permanent lakes. So they change also the patterns of erosion incision in the valleys, transporting sediments downstream and filling basins far away from the volcano with new sediments. And in addition, it also produces a big amount of changes in the biota around the volcano, and thus there is a change in the pattern of landsliding, for instance. So there is a 1,000-year scale change after a sector collapse. The volcanoes in the southern Andes of Chile are related to the subduction of the Nazca Plate beneath the South American Plate. It occurs at a rate of about 7 centimeters a year, and most of the volcanoes in the southern Andes of Chile have a compositional range between basaltic and rhyolitic compositions. So the whole range of alkaline suites of rocks. But rhyolitic compositions are not very frequent, as well as basaltic compositions. In the case of basaltic compositions, they tend to be controlled by very important structural characteristics of the continent. In this case, the transtension and transpression produced by some crustal faults, very important ones like the Elkinovsky fault, and the transversal faults that cut this main transtensional structure. So in transversal faults that goes to the northeast, the volcanoes with basaltic composition are more common, and it can be explained as the mafic magmas are able to rise through those structures and reach the surface without big residence times and big interaction with the surrounding crust. Antuco volcano is a stratovolcano, a composite volcano that has been active since about 150,000 years ago. But his historical activity is very prominent, and it has been producing at different rates a huge number of eruptions, about more than 25 eruptions in the last 400 years. So the reposed times in this volcano range between 5 years and 20 to 60 years, depending on the period of activity that we analyze in the historical records. This volcano is located in the southern Andes of Chile, very close to the international border between Chile and Argentina. And the volcano is related to Lake Laja, which is a major body of water. The volcano is mainly basaltic in composition in its whole evolution, but it has also some dacitic compositions in the oldest units. But the volcano has suffered a sector collapse about 6.2 thousand years ago, and between this or before and after this sector collapse, there was not a big change in the composition of the magmas. It has continued to be basaltic in the evolution of the volcano. So here we have in this pale orange color the deposits of Antuco debris avalanche, and they can be found about 20 kilometers away from the volcano. And the sector collapse itself involved the loss of about 1,000 meters in height. So this was a huge event in the history of this volcano. And then after the sector collapse, there was a series of pyroclastic density currents occurring towards the west, and long lava flows inundating the incision of the valleys produced after the deposition of the avalanche and the new drainages of the rivers of the area. There was an intense reworking after this avalanche, but also there was a rise in the level of the lake, producing a breakage of the natural dam produced by the avalanche, and it triggered more important, in this case, reworking of materials, because there was a very huge lake outburst. So after the sector collapse, the volcano itself suffers rapid regeneration with these basaltic lavas. So you can see here the scar of the sector collapse, and you can imagine taller volcano edifice before the sector collapse. And here we have the main part of the edifice, the collapsed edifice, which is the Cerro Condor Toreba block. So we now will talk about the avalanche and the collapse itself. So the avalanche is produced by, or is characterized by a hummocky surface, and the thickness varies between 20 and 90 meters. It covers about 82 square kilometers, and the initial volume is or has been estimated in about 5 cubic kilometers, and now we estimate a new volume of about 4.5 cubic kilometers. So there is a transformation of the deposit from the source to the front of the debris avalanche, and it changes from block phases to mixed phases, and finally metric phases, as we will see in the next slides. But you can see a lot of hammocks here in those images, very nice hammocks, well-preserved ones. So this is the Toreva phases, about 6.3 kilometers from the source, and they also preserve homogeneous blocks of the collapsed edifice, and they are intrinsically carried by a network of dikes, basaltic dikes. So you can think about the triggering mechanisms of the avalanche that can be related to magmatic intrusions without magmatic eruption, maybe. So we have found in the mixed phases of the avalanche some pristine basaltic blocks with G-sulfide that have some insights of quick quenching that can be related maybe with the exhumation of magmatic intrusion that was rising up in the volcano. So they can correspond to maybe to some sort of magmatic triggering. This blocks repeats into the mixed phases far away from the source, and then in the metric phases 20 kilometers away from the source. And in the basal phases, you can find these classic dikes and substratum intrusions into the avalanche. And here we have collected many good pieces that have been analyzed by radiocarbon dating. So the big picture of our investigation is given by the radiocarbon dating that we have obtained from different palosols, different charcoal samples, and also some pieces of wood that we have collected from the avalanche. So the avalanche contains good pieces that range between about 10 kiloyears ago and 6 kiloyears ago. So we can imagine that this avalanche has transported many old trees that were still standing in the valley, in the pre-collapse valley, and they were probably dead at that point, as is commonly observed in the Andes, where some species like Nothofagus dombeyi used to live for a long time, and then after their death, they can be incorporated in such kind of debris avalanche deposit. But what we know very well is that the younger pieces of good found in the avalanche are about 6,000 years ago. So we can say that this is the maximum age of the avalanche given by the minimum age of the trees still standing there. After that, we think there is a paucity between the avalanche and the subsequent processes, where there were many paraclastic density currents affecting the lowlands west from the volcano. And these pieces have they have a maximum age of 3.5 thousand years ago, as we have found some charcoal pieces incorporated in this deposit. Then we have some fluvial reworking and the deposition of some paleosols that contain organic matter that was charcoalized, was charred by the lava flows that flew down the valley above this paleosol. So they are about 3,000 years ago. And then we have an intense period of reworking that we relate to the breakage of the natural dams formed by the avalanche deposit and the rising in Laja Lake that are about also 3,000 years ago, and they finally end about 1.8 thousand years ago. This is a very interesting sequence of events that shows from the sector collapse to the change of the raptor style into a very explosive style of volcanism, basaltic volcanism, probably ferromagmatic in its mechanism. And then we have again huge lava effusions followed by the rupture of the lake and the flooding of the lowlands west from the volcano. So these pictures contain better, a larger detail of this series of events, but we can emphasize that sediment, like lake sediments, in areas that were occupied by the lake before its rupture, range between 5,000 years and 3.4 thousand years ago, as you can see in those images. So very interesting how this lake developed during a long time before its violent outburst. But what's more interesting is that you can find basaltic ashes. In this case, they are transformed into alluvial deposits, but you can find those elements far away from the volcano, about 50 kilometers from the volcano. They are massive deposits, about 40 meters thick, unconsolidated accumulations of materials, and they come from Antuco volcano. So how those materials have traveled so far away. And here you can see this image, and you have this scale in the lower right side of the image, about 50 kilometers long. And you can see how these materials traveled and flooded most of the central valley of Chile. So here we have the Andes mountain range, the main cordillera, and here you have another mountain range, which is the coastal cordillera. So here is Antuco, here is Laja Lake, and this lake was very very large in the past after the sector collapse, about 200 meters higher than its current level, and it was blocked here by the avalanche, and the avalanche failed, producing this outburst of the lake, flooding all the central valley between those two big mountain ranges, and then continuing to the west into the Pacific Ocean. So it's a very, very big transformation of the landscape. And the younger charcoal that has been dated here it's about 1.8 thousand years ago. So it was a very young event in the history of the landscape of the central Chile. So we have found also some archaeological pieces, evidence from ceramics that are or belong from the Talca 101 archaeological site, which has the exact same date than our charcoal pieces. So we think that this is the age of the latest breakage of the lake. Probably there was um, a series of pulses of ruptures and a series of floodings, and the latest occurred about this age. And here you can see the pieces of ceramics that are being studied in this research. So what we are doing in the next steps of this investigation, we like to understand how this debris avalanche deposit is related to the changes in the magmatic plumbing system of this volcano and how basaltic volcanoes react to depressurizations produced by sectional collapses. So we are working in Antuco. In this topic, we are working in the debris avalanche deposit description and the pre and post collapse, selected samples for petrography, crystal size distribution, bulk and glass geochemistry, crystal geochemistry, and many other aspects to establish the change in the petrological sources of this magma, geothermal barometry, etc. And we are also working in a numerical modeling of how basaltic volcanoes react to this depressurization. And this is always in the context of how volcanic hazards relate to these dramatic processes of landscape change in volcanoes. So in this case, the transformation of the eruptive style and the damming of the lake and the subsequent pulsatory rupture of the lake are all elements that are related to volcanic hazards with a long-term evolution. So the debris avalanche event, the sector collapse, does not finish with the deposition of the avalanche. This is the beginning of a series of changes, of transformation that can take 1,000 years to produce big impacts in the landscape and in the communities living around volcanoes. Thank you for attending this presentation. I hope you like it. And here you have a series of references and other papers that you can look at if you have more interest in this topic. Thank you, and any question you can ask me to my email.